You hear me? I, of course, am Kelly. Most of you know me. I am usually a more behind the scenes kind of person. Most of you probably know that I'd rather be downstairs with your kids, as Pastor Matt just pointed out, or off doing my treasurer stuff that I do for the church. But I have been inspired by Story Sundays, so I asked Pastor Matt if I could come up and share. So here I am. So I was born in Owasso, Michigan on April 2nd, 1977. I grew up in a little town called Ovid, Michigan. Most people have never heard of it, but I'm from a large family. I have 2 sisters and 4 brothers that grew up in the same house as me, and I have 2 sisters that didn't grow up in the same house. My biological mother and father divorced when I was around 3. I spent the next several years of my life living with my biological mother. Probably wondering about the biological comment. I'll get to that. You'll understand later. So custody of myself and my 2 sisters, because we're from different dads and moms, but of my 2 sisters, went to my biological mother, and I got to visit my dad every other weekend, because that's just how things were done in the 80s. The mom got custody. So my dad got remarried to an amazing woman. Her name's Kathy, who accepted myself and my 2 sisters as her own. My biological mother started dating a guy at some point. So in my life, I have experienced and learned a few things that I'm going to share with you today. God's grace and protection. Psalm 71:7, Dave's going to throw it up. My life is an example to many because you have been my strength and protection. So when I was 7, I remember getting my tonsils and adenoids taken out. It's a basic procedure that a lot of kids get. The experience I had with it is the first that I can remember of God's grace and protection. So at 7, when you have a surgery like this and something hurts, you might try to refuse to do what your parents tell you to do. I had the same experience with Devin when he had his out. Parents just have a hard time getting the kids to do it. Well, my biological mother was not a very good parent and didn't figure out how to make me drink water, eat popsicles, keep my throat hydrated. So one night when I was visiting my dad on the weekend, I woke up and I was bleeding from my mouth, like really bad. So I remember going down the stairs and to get help from my dad, and he was playing Pac-Man on our Atari. That's how long ago it was, right? So I vividly remember watching him, turning and seeing me with blood in my hands and more coming out. And I was just so scared. He threw our Atari remote and shattered the television screen, which my siblings were super happy about later. But he then rushed me to the hospital, which was only 5 minutes away. The doctors had to give me a blood transfusion and repair the damage done from not keeping the throat hydrated. Not sure what the medical thing is. I'm sure our nurse friends can explain that, but this is what I remember. So the doctors told my parents that if I had not been at my dad's house that weekend, I would not have survived. I would have bled to death before I got to the hospital. So that's how I remember God's grace and protection. So God intricately made me me. Job 10:10 says, "You guided my conception and formed me in the womb." So we're fast forwarding a few years. Here comes the biological mother comment. There was a situation that occurred with my oldest sister and my biological mother's boyfriend that I'm not going to go into detail about, but it was bad, really bad. So this happened, and my 2 sisters and I got taken away from our biological mother, and custody was given to our dad. Somehow, I'm not sure why or how, but we had to visit our biological mother every other weekend. It was not the best environment for children to be in, but the court ordered it, and there was really nothing to be done about it. So the boyfriend was out of the picture now, so that was good. But there was soon a new boyfriend, and there was a lot of smoking and drinking and swearing and drugs done right in the house with us kids. So most of you know me, and I am a law and or rule follower to a fault. It's just, if there's a rule, there's a rule. Just follow it. It's just part of who God made me to be. So this was a very difficult time in my life. Trials. 1 Peter 1:6 says, "So be truly glad there is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while." So now I'm in middle school and have lots of friends, and I like my school. Scratch that. I loved my school. School and learning were amazing. I loved homework and reading and going to school. Yep, I'm a nerd, in case you guys didn't know that. I'm really good at learning. So here comes some drama from my childhood. There was an accusation made that resulted in Child Protective Services being called. They came to our house one evening as us kids were getting ready for bed. They advised my dad and stepmom of the accusation and advised that us kids could stay at the house, but until the investigation was complete, my dad couldn't stay in the house with us. So my dad left and he went and stayed at my grandma's house. So the next day, I was at school and I got called down to the principal's office. So I'm not sure how they do this today, but I'm pretty sure it's not how it was when I was in school. It was a page across the entire school because they didn't have intercoms. So everyone knew that I got called to the principal's office. So, yeah. So I get to the office, and there's Child Protective Services and my biological mother waiting for me. The agent tells me that they're going to remove me from my dad's house and send me to my biological mother's house. I, of course, argued with them because it wasn't a good environment at all at my biological mother's house. So, of course, I lost this argument because I'm just a middle schooler and they're adults, so I lost it. Or at least that's what they thought. So I was very stubborn and determined that I was not moving into my biological mother's house. So I was not transferring schools and leaving everything that I loved. So I left the meeting with the direction that I was going to be picked up after school from my biological mother. Went directly to the counselor's office, called my dad. He sent my grandma up to the school to pick me up and took me home to my mom, my stepmom, Kathy. That's right. Now she's my mom. By this time, Kathy had become so involved with us that she's now my mom. She's been there since I was 3. So I get home, and now I have my parent so that I have an adult to help me against Child Protective Services and my biological mother. So they come to the house after school and asked why I left. And I remember telling them that they lied to me. They told me I get to stay home, and now they're trying to take me away from home. So after a long discussion with my mom and me being very stubborn and explaining what goes on at my biological mother's house, they let me stay at home, and I never had to go visit my biological mother's house again. So yay. The investigation continued, and I honestly can't remember how long it took, maybe 2 or 3 days. But they figured out it was all a lie, and my dad got to come home, and we returned to normal. I got to continue school at the school that I loved, and I got to stay with my family. I am thankful that God gave me the strength to do what I did, as I know a lot of children at that age might not have had that kind of stubbornness or strength. Happiness. Ecclesiastes 8:15 says, "So I recommend having fun because there is nothing better for people in this world than to eat, drink, and enjoy life." Fast forward to high school. Things are going well. We live on a farm in Ovid with an octagon shape. It was octagon shaped, which means it had 8 sides. It's a really cool barn. It's still there. We had a lot of fun playing in the barn, the cornfields, and just being outside. We went on lots of family vacations, camping, hiking, fishing. I started going to a new church that had a youth group that had a lot of fun things going on. An old friend started attending my school and the youth group. His name was David. We knew each other from when I was younger, and my dad used to fix his mom's Ford Pinto. Had to be fixed a lot, so they were at our house a lot. So, through lots of youth group events and some very pushy friends, I ended up going on a date with David. We went to Mancino's in St. John's for dinner, during which apparently I was annoying him by tapping his leg with my foot under the table. So he decided to tie my shoe to the table because he's David, and we all know David. So we ate dinner, and he forgot that my shoe was tied to the table. So when we got up to leave, I dragged the table with me. So remember, I have 4 brothers. This is not new to me. Pranks are not new to me. So I didn't get mad. I just laughed and called him a dork. Still call him a dork today, all the time. You guys all hear it. We then went to Walmart and walked around. It was a very exciting first date. So Well, obviously now I'm Kelly Bramen, married to David Bramen. We got married in June of '96. A few years after we got married, we started trying to have children, and we were not having any success. So we went and saw a specialist who actually told us that I would have better luck getting David pregnant than David getting me pregnant. So that was that, and we just stopped trying. At this time, we lived over in Durand, Michigan, and we soon moved to Greenville for job opportunities. Faith and peace. Galatians 5:22 says, "But the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness," and he didn't change it, "and self-control. There is no law against these things." So now it's the year 2000. I'm working at a receptionist at Northland Corporation over on Ranny Drive. You guys remember the old factory? It's not there anymore. Yep, so now it's Marvell. So it's the same place I work today. We're just in a different building over on Van Dynes. David was a security guard. So anyway, there came a point where I just didn't feel right. I didn't feel sick, but I didn't feel right. I felt different. So I ended up taking 2 pregnancy tests on my lunch hour. And God has a plan. He always has a plan. So both of them came back positive. So I called my husband to tell him to make me a doctor's appointment, and he would need to come with me. His schedule was a lot more complicated than mine. So he asks me why, and I tell him that I have 2 positive pregnancy tests. And he, for some reason, thinks that I'm joking. Not sure why, as I am not the comic in this relationship, but he did. I finally convince him. He sets up a doctor's appointment for the same day and meets me at the doctor's office. They run a test and confirm, yep, I'm pregnant. They give us the name of an OBGYN to set an appointment with and send us on our way. We were so happy. God had blessed us with a child. Our response, we started looking for a local church to start attending, because even though we were Christians, we were not attending a church. So we lived on the corner of Orange and Berry Street, right over here, in Greenville at this time. So we had a few church options that were literally within walking distance of our house. So we chose to visit this First Church of God on the corner of Grove and Franklin. It's always awkward visiting a new church, so we were nervous, but when we walked in the doors of First Church, we were met by this lovely couple that did a wonderful job greeting us. They give us their names, they explain where everything's at, how service would work. They ask us what brought us here, and we tell them a little bit of our story. They ask us to sit with them during church, and they are so nice that, of course, we say yes. They are, of course, Roger and Brenda Labazo, although I don't know if you guys were married at that time. Were you married in 2000? Were you? Okay, I couldn't remember. Couldn't remember if you got married that year or not. So anyway, the day we first visited this church, Pastor Dave Perry had lost a bet to the youth group over something. I have no idea why. Or what it was. But because he lost this bet, the youth group got to shave his beard during service in front of everyone. Do you remember that? I don't remember what the bet was. It was funny. So anyway, we were hooked, and we've been attending here ever since. So I had some complications with my pregnancy that resulted in me being put on bed rest for a few weeks. One day I wasn't feeling well, and we decided I needed to go to see the doctor. Well, the doctor wasn't available, but he told us to go to the emergency room. So we did, and they got us right up to the maternity ward and hooked up to all the monitors that they hook to pregnant women. Turns out that I had preeclampsia, and they admitted me to the hospital right away. So my OBGYN that I had been seeing is out of town, and I had to see the one that was on call, which was Dr. Janizelli. David calls our parents, and they all get to the hospital. Well, because of the preeclampsia, they were giving me a medicine to lower my blood pressure, but they're also giving me a medicine to induce labor, but they counteract each other, so it takes forever for labor to start. So I've been in labor for about 12 hours. Contractions are getting more often, and the pain is getting worse. The anesthesiologist comes in and asks if I want an epidural. So when you have preeclampsia, you don't get to have normal labor experience, whatever that is. I have been on my left side this entire time, not allowed to move, nothing. Left side, waiting for things to happen. So I took the epidural because I was in a lot of pain. So contractions are getting strong, and we're getting ready for the big event. When Dr. Janizelli comes in and looks at that paper that it spits stuff out for the doctor, I don't know what, but she looks at that paper that prints out of that machine that I'm hooked up to. She asks the nurse for the paper just before that, and then she looks at me and tells me that I cannot push no matter what. They have to take the baby emergency C-section, and the medical SWAT team is going to come in and take me to the emergency or the operating room, which is what happened. They get me down there to the operating room. They push a medicine that's supposed to numb me from the waist down, but it doesn't work fast enough, so they have to knock me completely out. I wake up. I don't know how much longer. Eventually, I get back to my room, but I am out of it, so I cannot see my baby yet. But January 20th, 2001, Dylan joined our family. Life is good until the middle of that night. Dylan started having seizures in the middle of the night, and after several phone calls and arguments with doctors, Dylan, with the staff and David, they were all working on it, Dylan is going to be transferred from Spectrum United in Greenville to DeVos in Grand Rapids. At the same time Dylan is having seizures that David is working with doctors and nurses on, I wake up heaving and getting sick. So he comes back to the room to tell me what's going on, but finds me like that. So the nurse comes in and she gives me a medicine to knock me out because I'm ripping my staples. But then they also need me awake so that I can help with what's going on with Dylan. So, you know those little ammonia tabs on the side of the door all over the hospital? Yeah, she used one of those on me. Never forget it. They're awful. They're so awful. So they get me all situated, and David sits down to tell me what is going on. And he's an absolute mess. First-time father, this is what's happening. So I have him call his mom and his aunt, and they get up to the hospital, as I can't support him right now in my current state. So I remember he sat down and he asked me how I was so calm. And I just told him that Dylan is fine and will be fine. He asked me, how do you know? And I replied, if there was something wrong with him, wouldn't I know? We were just connected for 9 months. So God gave me so much peace during this time to support the events that are going on. It was just so amazing how much strength he gave me. I don't know how I did it. So they transferred Dylan to Grand Rapids, but will not release me from Greenville in my state. But luckily at this time, David works on the ambulance in Greenville. So DeVos wants to have a bedside meeting to go over what's wrong with Dylan, why he's having seizures. So they work it out so that David can transport me to DeVos for this bedside meeting. So we get there. I'm only on a day pass. I have to be back for medicine at a certain time. So that was what it was. So this meeting, we get there. It's not a bedside meeting. It's in this huge conference room. Like 3 doctors, a social worker, I don't know. There were so many people. So many people. So they proceed to tell us that Dylan has significant brain damage to both sides of his brain, and that we have a struggle ahead of us, and that he would probably never walk or talk, but they had high hopes that he could feed himself without drooling. So most of you know Dylan. Of course, he can walk and he can talk. Not quite sure he can eat without drooling, but that's okay. So, but you might not know how or why. So they tell us this bad news, and the social worker asks if there's anything that we need. And I just look at everyone, and I'm like, can I see him? I still haven't seen my baby at this point. Like, they just ripped him out of me and took him. So they were all surprised that I hadn't actually seen him yet. So they arranged for me to see Dylan while the social worker works on getting me transferred from Greenville to Grand Rapids so that I can stay with him. So they roll me in a wheelchair to see Dylan, and he's in this little isolette in the neonatal unit. They tell us that he's not moving a lot, he's not eating a lot, and not to expect much. So I just ask if I can touch him, and they lift the side of his isolette, and as soon as they lifted it, I didn't even touch him. As soon as they lifted it up, he lifted his head and turned and looked at me. And the nurse was like freaking out, which I'm still confused why she was, because it just makes sense, but she checks him over and everything's fine. So this is his reaction to finally seeing his mommy that he was in the side of for 9 months, that they ripped him out of and now hasn't been in the same room with for 4 days. He eats well for me and starts improving. I'm released from the hospital because I'm also better for now. We visit Dylan for a few weeks at DeVos, and somehow I come down with an intrauterine infection. So I don't know if you guys know much about the neonatal unit, but if you're sick, you're not getting in at all. Like, no matter what it is, you're just not getting in. So now I can't visit Dylan at the hospital because I'm sick. So luckily it was only a few days, and Dylan was doing well enough that they could release him, and David got to bring him home. So at this time, Dylan still has seizures, and he keeps his head turned to the right all the time. But we have him home. When he was released, they tell us not to take him out in public and to watch him for seizures and to just be careful. So we, of course, bring Dylan to First Church that Sunday to be prayed over by our congregation. So now we have him home, so what do? Well, our good friend Tammy worked at the Cider Center here in Greenville. She called me and explained to me all the reasons why she thought the doctors were wrong and how resilient babies' brains are, especially in the first few years. So she told me about this early on program at the Cider Center that he would qualify for, where he could get physical and occupational therapy. So, of course, we sign him up and we get started. In the meantime, of course, I have to go back to work because we got to keep our insurance. We've got a sick baby at home. So, miracles. Psalm 66:5 says, "Come and see what our God has done, what awesome miracles he performs for people." Dylan was blessed with an amazing daycare provider. Her name is Terry, and she ran her daycare right out of her home. It's the big red house right over here on the corner of Webster and 57. And it was right on my way to work. She was so amazing, as were the therapists. So we met with the therapists at the daycare, and they showed us both these exercises that we needed to do with Dylan 3 times a day. I could do the mornings and the evenings. I needed her to do the afternoons, which she happily agreed to. So most of these exercises were fun. It was just a game, moving arms, moving legs, turning him over. But the tendon in his neck was so tight, which was why his head was turned to the right, that he couldn't actually turn it to the left. We had to turn it for him, which is why he didn't use his left side, because babies apparently have to see things to use it. So we had to physically turn his head from one side to the other, and he hated it. I remember Dave's mom would get so mad at me because she lived with us at the time. I'm like, they're telling me I gotta do this. I know if we can get it released, then he can see it and he can use it. But I was hurting him. He was crying, right? But as a result, from that determination and Terry helping out, Dylan, we got that tendon release, and Dylan is now left-handed. So, go figure. Therapy goes well, and Dylan is reevaluated by a neurologist about a year or so later, and he is given a clean bill of health. He's now all better, doesn't need seizure medicine anymore, and the therapy was a complete success. He is now a normal baby, whatever that means. Life is good. Healthy baby, good jobs, nice house. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, December before Dylan was born, we bought a house. Right on Cass Street, same one we live in today, still within walking distance of this church. Imagine that. So everything's great. And guess what? Out of the blue, in 2003, I'm pregnant again. I was very nervous with my second pregnancy, obviously, with what went on with Dylan. So I go to the doctors a lot. We had good health insurance. It didn't cost anything. And my doctor wanted to see me as often as I wanted to go because I think she was as nervous as I was. So other than that, the pregnancy is normal. And on July 29th, 2004, David's birthday, early in the morning, our second bundle of joy, Devin, joined our family. He did not have any medical conditions or give us any heart attacks when he was a baby. However, he paid us back with his redheaded temper as a baby. All of you who know Devin know exactly what I'm talking about. If you worked in the nursery or downstairs, you know what I'm talking about. Our family was complete now with dad, mom, 2 children, and a dog. We were truly blessed and happy. Pain. Psalms 38:17 says, "I am on the verge of collapse, facing constant pain. So I had decided to go back to college to get my bachelor's degree, and I chose Davenport. Riley, go Riley. And I did my classes online. Other than that, nothing really fun or exciting happened in our life. We were blessed and happy until November 9th, 2011, the same day the Huntington Bank got robbed in Greenville. While walking into the doctor's office, David felt and heard a pop in his head. So I received a phone call from the doctor's office that I needed to come pick up my husband and take him from the doctor's office to the hospital because the ambulance was stuck in Stanton and they couldn't legally transport him to the hospital. I don't know. Legality stuff, I don't know. So this is when my husband, of course, had brain surgery. It didn't happen right away. It took many months to get diagnosed and for the surgery to happen. He had a Chiari-1 malformation, which means his brain was sliding down into a spinal column, cutting off the spinal fluid flow throughout the body, which is what gave him the stroke-like symptoms they thought he was having. So his first brain surgery was in February of 2012. I finished my last course for my bachelor's degree sitting with David in the hospital after his surgery. So what is life like when you have 2 children and your husband needs brain surgery? Well, it truly sucks. There's no better word for it. It just sucks. On top of him having to eat, talk, walk, etc. all over again after the surgery, we lost the majority of our household income. We had debt that we couldn't pay. David, of course, lost his job. My vehicle was repossessed. He had a company vehicle, so that went with the job. And then my vehicle was repossessed. And our mortgage company was threatening to take our house because we couldn't make the payments. So one day I happened to be at church expressing this to Chris Cohn, just venting because we need to share our burdens with each other. And that same day, Tom Cohn calls me and tells me of this mortgage program that mortgage companies don't really tell you about, but if you ask about it, they have to let you do it. And I called. I don't remember the name of it, but I called the mortgage company and asked about the program, and then all of a sudden, instead of nasty collection calls, I'm getting paperwork to sign to get into this program. So once it's all said and done, we got to keep our house. Obviously, we still live there, and our monthly payment was cut by more than half. So one issue resolved, but my husband is still in a wheelchair, and he still needs help with everything. So luckily, his family was around and could help so I could go to work. And they could watch the boys and David as well because I could no longer afford daycare without David's income, so they watched David. So the church was there for us in so many ways, from individual people to the entire congregation. Roger and Linda Ferris organized a benefit for David to help with bills. I still don't know who was all involved. I know it was a lot of people that provided support and attended the benefit. So we raised enough money to pay off most of our bills so that we were no longer drowning. For that, I thank all who were involved. Rescue. Psalms 34:19 says, "The righteous person faces many troubles, but the Lord comes to the rescue each time." So my side of the story, what do you do when you have all this stress going on and you are now the sole income provider for your house? I got to the point that I could not handle it. I was broken and I was running on empty. I was going through the motions of life, but I wasn't actually there, if that makes sense. I needed a way to work off work stress, home stress, my own personal stress, and I was at my breaking point. So most of you know this next part of my story, but I'm going to share it anyway. So a new gym was being opened in Greenville. Now, I have been a member of every gym in Greenville at one point or another. But David and I went and checked out this new gym and met with Chris Reisner, the owner, and some of his staff at the time. We were amazed to see how they transferred that old antique building that I was afraid to walk into when it was that, on the corner of 57 and 91, to an amazing fitness facility. So have you ever met a group of people or gone to a place and just felt like you were with your people? It's where you should be. Well, that's how I felt when I first walked into Fresh Start Fitness. The name alone was calling out to me. So the building and the staff, some of which at the time were Chris, Aaron, Ari, and Dylan, to name a few, all just felt right to me. So we signed up on the spot, and I started going to work out a few days a week after work. Now I know without a shadow of a doubt that if Fresh Start Fitness had not opened with Chris as the owner and the staff that he had at the time, I would have had a mental breakdown. I ended up being hospitalized. I was in that bad of a mental state due to everything. Community matters, and Fresh Start has that. The staff, owners, and members are a community. So a few years go by, and they start a Zumba class at Fresh Start led by Roxy. I fell in love with Zumba immediately. A year or two goes by, and Roxy decided that she no longer wanted to teach Zumba at Fresh Start. So Chris asked me if I would be willing to get licensed. And I remember thinking, really? Me? So I talked to David about it, and after some thought, decided to go for it. This was so far out of my comfort zone at the time. So my first class was actually on my birthday. So now it's just second nature to me. I love teaching Zumba. You all should come check it out sometime. Mondays and Wednesdays at 6:15. Community. Galatians 6:2 says, share each other's burdens, and in this way, obey the law of Christ. So today, I'm the assistant controller at Marvell Refrigeration, which just basically means I'm an accountant. Not a tax accountant. I don't do taxes. Don't ask me tax questions. David was approved for Social Security disability. He has, of course, learned to walk, eat, and talk again. It has been a long road for our family. A lot of members of this congregation have been with us every step of the way. Things are not perfect in any sense of the imagination. David suffers from depression and has days that he can't even get out of bed. His medicines work more times than they don't, but he still has many physical limitations along with the depression, and at certain times, he has no filter. Both of our children have obviously been affected in their own ways from this experience, but I will leave that to them to share with you if they choose. So here's my takeaway from my experiences. The support systems that we choose to surround ourselves with are important. I chose to be employed at a company that would let me work remotely while my husband went through brain surgery. I'm sure that was more for them than for me, but it worked out. We chose to surround ourselves with the support system of this church right here. I can't even list the ways that this church has been there for me through many times in my life. I chose to focus on myself and surround myself with a community of Fresh Start Fitness, and as a result, I'm healthier both physically and mentally, and happier because I relieve stress every time I work out. We are all in this life together. The way that we treat each other matters. The things that we do for each other matter. Being real with each other, even when you don't know the answers, matters. The little things in everyday life matter. I will close with a verse that I mentioned earlier, as I feel it is what I strive to focus on and what I believe will make living this life together better and how God wants us to do it. Galatians 5:22 says, but the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against these things.